That late afternoon, a little girl ran barefoot through a silent street, as if the world behind her had collapsed. Her knees were bleeding, her dress torn, and her tiny hands trembled with a fear no child should carry. She wasn't running from danger. She was running toward the only man she believed could keep her safe. When she reached him, she threw herself into his arms, clinging to his FBI jacket like her last refuge. Then came the question that shattered
Could you
his
be
heart.
my dad for one day?
Could you be my dad for one day? In
me
that
see those
fragile
knees.
whisper lay years of loneliness,
one hurt when I touch
silence,
it?
and a truth
a
that
little.
would soon unravel
We'll get you
everything.
patched up in no time. Easy,
Before we
easy.
continue,
You're all right. Just
where do
hold
you
still
think
for
this
me.
moment took place?
What was that sound?
Tell me in the comments.
Someone there?
And don't forget to like and
Could you be my
subscribe
dad
for the
for
full
one
story.
day?
The late afternoon had the stillness of a held breath, the kind that settles over a quiet street when the world seems undecided between peace and a storm. Rowan Hale, a 45-year-old FBI agent with a solid build and a calm posture shaped by decades of discipline, stood beside his German shepherd, Odin, adjusting the straps of the dog's worn black K9 harness. Rowan's hair, dark brown streaked with salt and pepper, caught the soft light, and faint lines at the corners of his hazel eyes hinted at a life lived with restraint and responsibility. His Navy FBI jacket looked slightly faded from years of service, and the old silver watch on his wrist, once belonging to his father, clicked steadily like a small reminder of duty. Rowan seldom smiled, but when he did, it was with the warmth of someone who saw brokenness and still believed in goodness. Odin, 5 years old, black and tan fur shining under the light, lifted his pointed ears. The dog was muscular, disciplined, and steady, with gentle brown eyes that always seemed to sense what Rowan didn't say. Rowan had just tightened the final buckle when a sound shot across the quiet street. A rapid, frantic patter of bare feet slapping the pavement. Before instinct even reached his mind, Odin barked low, his entire posture shifting from calm to alert. Rowan turned, and the sight that met him carved straight through the stillness of the day. A little girl, 8 years old, white skin flushed pink from exertion, honey brown hair flying in messy waves behind her, ran straight toward him. Her small body bounced forward with desperate momentum. Her feet were bare, clotted with dirt and dust. Her knees were scraped, bleeding in 2 crimson trails. Tears flooded her large brown eyes, and with each uneven breath, her face crumpled a little more. Her yellow pastel dress, once delicate and childlike, clung to her legs from sweat and dust, and the white cardigan loosely hanging from her shoulders was torn at one sleeve. Rowan barely managed to step forward when the girl collided into him. No hesitation, no fear. Her tiny arms wrapping around his torso as though he were the only pillar holding her world upright. She buried her face against his chest, clutching the fabric of his FBI jacket with trembling fingers. Odin stiffened at first, but the moment he caught her scent, soft, familiar, the little girl who had stroked his ears months before, his posture transformed. He moved to her side, standing as a shield, his large body blocking the street behind her. The girl's voice cracked in a way Rowan had rarely heard in children. Mr. Rowan, could you be my dad just for one day? Please, just one day. Her words tumbled out between sobs, fragile enough to break a man's heart in a single breath. Rowan froze, not out of confusion, but out of an overpowering jolt of emotion. It wasn't every day a child said something like that. It wasn't something said without a reason, and surely not with that trembling desperation. He lowered himself slowly, mindful not to startle her, and rested a steady hand on her small back. His voice was gentle, quieter than usual. Hey, you're safe now. "It's all right." But he didn't ask why. Not yet. Something in her shaking shoulders told him that even one wrong word might shatter her further. Odin nudged the girl's elbow with his nose and let out a tiny whine, his tail pressed to the ground in anxious protectiveness. The girl shifted, clutching the dog's fur with one small hand while still gripping Rowan's jacket with the other. Her sobs softened slightly at the feel of Odin leaning close. Her name, he remembered, was Mia. Mia Turner. A sweet, delicate child he had encountered in passing near the grocery store 2 weeks earlier. Back then, she had been shy, sitting alone on the steps with a school notebook. And when Odin approached her, she had smiled. One of those small, fragile smiles that came from deep inside children who rarely had reasons to smile. Now, seeing that same child run to him barefoot, bleeding and terrified, felt like a punch to the chest. He lifted her into his arms. Mia immediately curled against him, her warm cheek pressed tightly to his collarbone. Her hair smelled faintly of dust and mint shampoo, and her breaths came in little gasps. Rowan held her carefully, as though she were made of glass, and Odin followed, keeping close enough that Rowan could feel the dog's presence at his leg. As Rowan carried Mia toward his porch, the sinking sun cast long shadows behind them. The quiet street remained undisturbed, but Rowan's heartbeat did not. His instincts, the ones sharpened by years of cases and tragedies, spoke in a grim whisper. Something is wrong. Very wrong. For a moment, he paused at the doorway, glancing at Mia's battered knees again. Scraped, dirty, fresh. Something had happened recently. Something she'd run from. But Rowan asked no questions yet. Children talk when they feel safe, not when they feel cornered. He stepped inside, setting her gently on the couch. Mia's small frame sank into the cushions, as though exhaustion had been chasing her long before her feet ever began running. Rowan knelt on one knee the same way he always did when speaking to someone smaller, showing respect rather than superiority. "Mia," he said softly, "you're safe here. Odin and I are with you." The little girl blinked up at him, her eyes shimmering. She looked like she wanted to say something that weighed heavily on her tiny chest. But no words came. Odin climbed onto the rug beside her, lowered his head, and placed one paw gently against the couch leg. His warm brown eyes followed her movements with devoted concern. Mia reached out and laid her hand on his head, fingers trembling but comforted by his steady heartbeat beneath her touch. As Rowan gently cleaned the blood on her knees, something strange happened. Something so small, it might have been missed if Rowan hadn't been watching closely. Mia winced, not at the sting of the antiseptic, but at the faint, metallic clink of his father's old watch. She flinched at the sound, shrinking back instinctively, her eyes darting toward the hallway like a frightened deer. There was no visible threat there, only the faint reflection of Rowan's silhouette in the framed glass. But Mia kept staring at that empty doorway, as if expecting someone or something to appear. Rowan's breath paused. Children don't fear doorways unless they have learned to. And Odin, normally calm during injuries, stood abruptly, ears forward, fur bristling along his shoulders. He let out a low, protective growl directed at nothing but the hollow space of the hall. A chill rippled through Rowan. Something had followed this little girl here. Not a person, perhaps, but a fear. The moment passed, but the message remained. Rowan took a slow breath and resumed cleaning her cuts, shifting the mood back to safety. He spoke to her in that gentle tone reserved for frightened children, telling her about Odin's first day of training, how clumsy the big dog had been while trying to fetch a rope, how he had tripped over his own paws. Mia's lips trembled into the faintest smile, though the tears hadn't completely dried on her cheeks. When he finished bandaging her knees, she swung her small legs over the edge of the couch and leaned into him again, her cardigan slipping off one shoulder. Rowan adjusted it carefully, the way a father would. He hadn't expected the gesture to sting so sharply in his chest. Outside, the last of the daylight dimmed, leaving the room washed in amber tones. Rowan sat next to Mia, not touching her, but close enough for her to feel grounded. Odin lay at their feet like a loyal guardian, chin resting on his paws, eyes never leaving her. Mia sniffed once, twice, gulped down air, and whispered into Rowan's sleeve. "Thank you for holding me." Her voice was small, but unmistakably sincere. She didn't elaborate, didn't explain why she had chosen him, why she had run to him, why she had asked for something as impossible as a borrowed father. But maybe she didn't need to. Not yet. Rowan's chest tightened with a feeling he had not experienced in years. "You don't have to thank me, Mia," he answered quietly. "You did the right thing coming here." Her head rested against him, her breathing evening out, the tremors in her hands slowly fading. He didn't know what had driven her into his arms, but he knew this. Whatever fear she carried, Rowan would not let her face it alone. The chapter closed with Rowan lifting her again, Odin rising to walk beside them like a silent vow of protection. The door clicked softly behind them, sealing off the world for a moment of fragile safety. And just like that, a small child's desperate plea had shifted the course of 3 lives. One FBI agent, one loyal dog, and one little girl searching for something she had lost long ago. If this moment touched your heart, may God bless your steps. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more stories of faith, rescue, and the small miracles he brings. Rowan closed the door behind them with a soft click, sealing the little girl away from whatever she had fled. The evening light settled gently across the room, catching the faint silver strands in his hair as he carried Mia toward the couch. She felt impossibly light in his arms, as if fear had hollowed out more of her childhood than anyone should have allowed. When he set her down, she folded into herself, legs drawn close, hands clinging to the hem of her white cardigan like a child afraid to be scolded. Her large brown eyes, normally bright when she had played with Odin weeks ago, now glimmered with exhaustion and something Rowan recognized all too well. The quiet dread of someone who expects the worst. Odin walked over with steady, purposeful steps. At 5 years old, the German shepherd looked majestic and imposing, but his warm brown eyes always softened around children. He lowered his head to Mia's knee, inspecting the dried trickles of blood with a low rumble of concern. The small scar along the bridge of his nose wrinkled as he sniffed the fabric of her torn dress, noticing details humans often missed. When he nudged her arm carefully, almost asking permission to be close, Mia's trembling fingers slipped into his fur, and she held on as though anchoring herself. Rowan retrieved a bowl of warm water and a cloth, then knelt in front of her, his posture low and inviting rather than authoritative. "You're safe here, Mia," he said gently. "Let me take a look, all right?" She nodded without lifting her gaze. As he cleaned the dirt from her knees, he noticed more than just scrapes. Faint bruises along her shins, a reddish mark near her elbow, and the slightly torn strap of her small backpack, frayed as if repeatedly yanked. The bag itself was faded blue with a pink zipper, clearly used for years, and on one side someone had scrawled uneven shapes with markers. Shapes that looked less like doodles and more like crossed-out names. Rowan kept his expression soft, though inside his chest something tightened. Mia remained quiet. Too quiet. Not the kind of silence that came from shyness, but the kind that came from being taught that speaking up invited trouble. as he dabbed disinfectant onto her skin, she stiffened, not at the sting, but at his hands moving near her wrist. Rowan noticed immediately and paused, giving her space. "You tell me if something hurts," he said softly. She hesitated, then whispered, "It doesn't hurt." But her voice trembled as if the truth lived somewhere deeper, somewhere she didn't know how to reach. He shifted to examine her cardigan sleeve, brushing it aside just enough to check for other injuries. Beneath the soft fabric, a faint hand-shaped shadow lingered on her upper arm. Not fresh, but recent enough. Rowan swallowed hard, masking his reaction with a slow exhale. He had seen these signs too often, not from bad kids or bad luck, but from adults who carried more anger than compassion. Gyodina lifted his head suddenly, tilting his ears, his eyes locked onto Mia's face with unusual intensity. He inched closer, pressing his warm weight against her leg, a gesture he used only when sensing deep distress. Mia's breath hitched as she curled around him, burying her face in the dog's fur. Rowan placed a light hand on her shoulder and felt the tiny tremors running through her body. "You did the right thing coming here," he murmured, "no matter what happened before." As Rowan reached for a fresh bandage, a sudden flicker of light glinted across the wall. Soft, brief, like the reflection of something metallic passing by. But nothing in the room had moved. No car outside, no window open. The glow settled for a second on the small cross hanging above Rowan's bookshelf, making it shimmer faintly even though the sun had already dipped low. Odin saw it too. He lifted his head sharply, ears pricked, gaze anchored on the cross with an alertness Rowan rarely saw. A low hum, not a growl, not a whine, something in between, vibrated from his chest. Mia's fingers tightened in Odin's fur. "It's like something's watching," she whispered. Rowan's breath paused. He followed her gaze to the cross, and though the light had vanished, a calmness washed through him. The kind that didn't feel like coincidence. The kind that felt like presence. But Mia's voice, small and afraid, brought him back. "Mr. Rowan, do you think angels watch kids who are scared?" He swallowed gently. "I think angels watch kids who run alone in the cold," he said softly. "And sometimes they guide them to the right door." Mia stared at him, her lips parting slightly in a tremble, like she wanted to believe him, but didn't know how. The moment faded, but the feeling didn't. Rowan resumed cleaning her wounds with greater care. He noticed how Mia's shoulders rose and fell in shallow breaths, how she kept glancing at the door as if expecting it to burst open. Trauma had a way of teaching even the smallest child to anticipate danger. He spoke softly to steady her. "Everything in this room is safe. Odin and I are right here." Odin confirmed it with a gentle rumble and nudged her again. Mia's hand found the top of his head, stroking cautiously, as though afraid she might lose even this moment of comfort. When her knees were cleaned and wrapped, Rowan folded the towel neatly and sat beside her, not close enough to overwhelm her, but close enough to be solid. Mia drew her legs up, pressing the hem of her dress against her shins as though trying to make herself smaller. Her small voice rose again, hesitant. "I didn't mean to run so fast." Rowan shook his head. "You don't have to explain anything right now." But Mia shook her head in return, tiny but determined. "I thought if I didn't run, I wouldn't get here in time." "In time for what?" Rowan asked gently. She finally raised her head. Her eyes, wet and shimmering, reflected something raw. "To ask you," she said, throat tightening, to be my person tomorrow." Rowan felt the air leave his chest. "Your person?" "For Hero Day." She swallowed. "Every kid brings someone, a hero, someone who makes them feel safe." Her fingers twisted into her cardigan. "Everyone has someone, but I don't. So I ran because I thought if I didn't ask fast enough, you wouldn't want to." His heart broke quietly, in the way hearts do when faced with a child who learned too young to expect rejection. "Oh, Mia," he whispered, "you don't ever have to run from my care. I'm right here." Her lips trembled. She didn't cry again, not loudly, but the silent kind, the kind that fell in single drops and made Rowan want to gather her in his arms all over. He didn't press for details. Why she had no one, what was happening at home, why Odin had reacted to her fear. Those stories would surface when Mia felt strong enough. For now, she had offered him the truth she could manage. As the last sliver of daylight faded, Rowan reached for a blanket draped over the arm of the couch and placed it gently around her shoulders. She leaned into him just slightly, her head resting against his arm. Odin settled at their feet, chin on his paws, forming a protective half-circle around them both. In that small, quiet room, Rowan understood the weight of a new unspoken promise. A child had run to him in fear, and for reasons he didn't yet know, she saw him as the one person she could stand beside on Hero Day. And he would not let her stand alone. If this chapter warmed your heart, may God's gentle hand guide you. Please like, comment, and subscribe to help spread his quiet miracles. The soft glow of Rowan's kitchen lights eased some of the tension clinging to the edges of the evening, casting a warm halo over the wooden table where he set a plate of simple food. Warm bread, scrambled eggs, and a small bowl of berries. He kept the servings modest, not wanting to overwhelm the 8-year-old who sat on the chair across from him with her legs tucked close, her yellow dress folded neatly under her. Mia watched the steam rising from the eggs with cautious eyes, as if even food needed her permission to exist in front of her. Her honey-brown hair, still slightly tangled from her frantic run earlier, framed her pale face like a soft, trembling curtain. Odin sat at her side, large body alert yet gentle, his head tilted as he watched her every movement with quiet devotion. Rowan, now changed into a simple gray shirt and his worn leather jacket draped over the back of his chair, moved slowly around the kitchen to avoid startling her. He had seen children traumatized before, but there was something especially fragile about Mia. The way she held her breath before each of his movements. The way her small hands trembled even when resting on her lap. He placed a cup of warm water in front of her. "Take your time," he said with a reassuring nod. "You're safe here." She nodded back, though the certainty didn't seem to fully land in her eyes. She lifted her fork carefully, as though worried she might drop it. Rowan noticed the way she examined each piece of food before eating it, an instinct developed by children who'd learned to be careful about everything. When she finally brought the fork to her mouth, her shoulders relaxed the smallest amount, the first sign that her body was beginning to thaw from fear. Rowan stayed mostly quiet, giving her space. But as he reached for a glass to pour himself water, his fingers brushed the rim, and the glass tipped. It fell only a few inches before he caught it. Yet even that tiny clink of sound sent Mia recoiling. Her chair scraped softly against the floor as she jerked backward, hands flying to protect her head, eyes wide with fear. Odin immediately stood, planting himself between her and the table, tail low but protective, gaze sharp. Rowan froze, glass secured in his hand, heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with the near spill. That reaction from a child, wasn't normal. Not from clumsiness, not from being startled. It was the kind of flinch that came from expecting a blow. Slowly, with deliberate gentleness, Rowan set the glass down and lowered himself to one knee beside her. "Mia," he said softly, voice steady as a prayer. "Nothing's going to happen to you here. You didn't do anything wrong." She stayed curled, chest heaving in tiny stutters. It took several seconds before she dared peek through her fingers. When she saw Rowan's calm expression, patient, warm, quietly protective, her rigid posture slowly began to loosen. She dropped her hands to her lap, embarrassed. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "You don't have to apologize," Rowan interrupted softly. "Not for being scared." Odin, sensing her distress, nudged her elbow with his nose, offering comfort in the simple, wordless way only animals could. Mia brushed her fingers through his fur, gripping gently as if grounding herself. The dog let out a soft exhale. Rowan resumed his seat, slower this time, and allowed a moment of silence to pass. He didn't want to push, but he also knew that silence sometimes opened doors that questions slammed shut. It was Mia who spoke first, her voice barely audible. "At school, the other kids told me that my mom died because of me." The words floated into the warm kitchen like shards of ice. Rowan felt them cut through the air. Mia stared at the table, blinking rapidly as though trying to stop tears before they formed. "They say she wouldn't have died if I wasn't born." Rowan's throat constricted. He kept his face steady, even though inside he felt a swell of protective anger rising. "Kids can be cruel," he said gently, "especially when they don't understand the pain someone carries." Mia sniffed, her eyes dropping to her hands. "They said, I'm a curse." The last word escaped as a faint breath, almost as if she feared speaking it would make it more true. He leaned forward, resting his hands loosely on the table. "Mia, look at me." She hesitated, then slowly lifted her gaze. Her eyes were swimming, but she didn't let the tears fall. Rowan held her stare with the quiet strength of a man who knew what it meant to carry grief. "Nothing about you is a curse," he said softly. "And your mother's love for you didn't end the day she left this world." For a heartbeat, she didn't blink. She allowed his words to enter the fractured places inside her. Though acceptance was not something that came easily. She looked down again, whispering, "My dad. He doesn't like looking at me." The confession dropped heavily between them. "He says I remind him too much of her." The pain in her voice was not loud, but deep. Deep enough to shake something inside Rowan. A child rejected not out of malice, but misplaced grief. He had seen grown men fall apart under the weight of loss. But for that weight to land on a little girl's shoulders was something he knew God himself must grieve. Before Rowan could respond, Odin abruptly straightened, ears snapping forward. His gaze whipped toward the kitchen window, pupils narrowing at something outside. His posture changed, not aggressive, but intensely alert. Mia stiffened, clutching the edge of the table. "What does he see?" she whispered. Rowan followed Odin's line of sight, but the window revealed only darkness settling over the yard. No movement, no cars, no shadows. Yet Odin took 2 slow steps toward the glass, his head tilted as though listening to something just beyond human hearing. The fur along his shoulders lifted slightly, an instinctive response to something unseen, but felt. Then, just as suddenly, Odin stopped. He turned back toward Mia and walked straight to her side, placing his large head against her hip. His eyes, soft and warm now, lifted to hers. not scanning for danger, but comforting. Mia lowered her hand to his head, stroking once. A faint tremble passed through her before she exhaled. Rowan watched them, a subtle chill running across his skin. Dogs didn't react like that without reason. And somehow, watching Odin place himself between Mia and the window felt symbolic, almost spiritual, as though something beyond Rowan's understanding was guiding the moment. Rowan gently spoke again. "You told me you've been trying really hard. What did you mean by that, Mia?" She shrugged one shoulder, lips trembling. "I try to be good. I clean the house. I stay quiet. I get good grades. I try not to make Dad sad." She swallowed hard. "But no matter what I do, he just walks away." Rowan nodded slowly, recognizing the heartbreaking pattern. "Sometimes people hurt because they lost someone they loved," he said, "and they don't know how to carry that pain without dropping it on others." Mia blinked at him, confused. Rowan softened his voice further. "Your father's hurting, Mia. Not because of you, because he misses your mother. That pain blinds him. But it doesn't mean you're the cause." Mia's lip quivered. "Then why doesn't he hug me anymore?" Rowan inhaled through his nose, steadying himself before speaking. "Because he hasn't learned how to grieve the right way." She rubbed her eyes with her sleeve, whispering, "I wish he would see me." Rowan's heart cracked at the simplicity of her wish, the kind of wish every child should have effortlessly fulfilled. Odin climbed onto the space between their chairs and rested his weight against both of them. Mia leaned into the dog instinctively, as though Odin was the only buffer strong enough to hold her sadness. Rowan watched her in the warm kitchen light. This tiny, pale girl with large brown eyes, too old for her age, carrying grief that didn't belong to her. And he understood something with painful clarity. She wasn't just frightened. She wasn't just lonely. She was carrying guilt, carved into her by the world around her. An invisible sentence, one no child should bear. If this chapter touched your soul, may God's mercy surround you. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more stories shaped by His gentle miracles. Night settled over Rowan's home with a quiet gentleness, as though the world itself wished to tread softly around the fragile child curled beneath a blanket on the couch. The rain had arrived without warning, tapping against the windows in uneven rhythms. Each drop shimmered across the glass, reflecting the warm, amber glow of the lamp beside Mia. She sat with her knees pulled close, her yellow dress pooled around her like a soft halo. Her honey-brown hair, still slightly damp from the light wash Rowan had helped her with earlier, framed her pale face in loose waves. Odin lay curled beside her feet, his large frame taking up half the rug, his brown eyes half-lidded but alert. Rowan watched her from the armchair opposite. The 45-year-old FBI agent leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, fingers loosely clasped. His salt and pepper hair caught the lamplight in muted silver streaks, and his hazel eyes, steady, patient, warm, never drifted far from Mia. The soft wrinkles at the corners of his eyes deepened slightly each time he studied her expression, as if measuring the weight of her unspoken pain. He wasn't a father, but at that moment, he sat like one, protective, attentive, quietly grieving for a loss that wasn't his. The storm outside deepened. Thunder murmured in the distance, soft and low, like an old man clearing his throat. Mia flinched only slightly this time, her fingers tightening around the blanket but not pulling away into herself. She looked toward the window, then back at Rowan. "Mr. Rowan," she said after a long silence, her voice delicate, almost airy. "Do you want to know about my mom?" Rowan felt his heart shift. He waited a beat, then nodded gently. "Only if you want to tell me." She sniffed, wiped her nose with the back of her sleeve, then repositioned the blanket as if creating a small, safe fort for herself before speaking. "She was really pretty," Mia began. "Everyone said she was. She had long brown hair, softer than mine. She ran her fingers through her own hair with a shy, sad gesture. And she had a smile that made people feel warm, like God lit a candle inside her." Rowan sat straighter, letting her words guide the moment. He didn't interrupt. "She used to work as a nurse," Mia continued. "She smelled like lavender soap. I remember that most." Her eyes softened at the memory, glowing with a light Rowan hadn't seen before. "She always read me bedtime stories, and she sang a little. Not very good," she added with a tiny, wavering smile. "But she tried." Her small fingers fiddled with the blanket again, twisting its edge into tight folds. "She loved me a lot. Everyone said so." Lightning flashed faintly across the window. Odin lifted his head, ears rising, but sensing no threat, he relaxed again. His tail thumped once, before curling back around his body. Mia watched him for a second, then lowered her voice. "When I was 3, she said slowly, I had this blue ball. It was my favorite. It had stars on it." She paused, her breath hitched. "I didn't look where it went when it rolled away." Rowan's chest tightened. He could feel where the story was headed. "The road was close to our yard." She swallowed hard. "I chased the ball. I didn't see the car. I didn't hear it either." She touched her chest lightly, fingers trembling. "But my mom did." The room fell impossibly quiet. So quiet Rowan could hear the faint tick of the old watch he had laid on the table earlier, the one he had removed because Mia feared its sound. "She ran after me," Mia whispered. "She pushed me as hard as she could. I landed on the grass." Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to continue. The car hit her instead. Lightning flared again. Thunder followed, louder this time, rolling across the sky. Mia flinched, but didn't curl inward. Instead, she stared at the floor, eyes glassy. "People told me she died instantly, but I don't know." She shook her head. "I just know." She didn't move, and I cried for her to get up, and she didn't. Rowan inhaled slowly, forcing the rising ache in his chest to settle. He reached toward her, not touching yet, letting his hand rest on the edge of the couch, close enough for her to choose. Mia's shoulders collapsed slightly. "I thought, because she pushed me, because she tried to save me, that if I didn't chase the ball, she wouldn't." Her voice cracked fully now, dissolving into a small gasp. "So it's my fault. If I didn't run, she'd still be here." Rowan felt the breath leave him, not from shock, but from the sheer weight of the guilt she carried. Guilt no child should ever know. He slid closer, sitting beside her with measured calm. "Mia," he murmured, voice deep and soft like a prayer. "Look at me." It took her a moment, but she finally turned. Her eyes shined with unshed tears, her lower lip trembling. She looked like a child who had been holding back a flood for years. Rowan's voice remained steady. "You didn't take your mother from this world. She gave her life because she loved you more than anything else on earth." Mia opened her mouth to argue, but Rowan gently shook his head. "Mothers don't die because of their children. They die protecting them. Your mother didn't leave because of you. She left because she chose to save you." Mia's breath shook. She clutched the blanket tighter. "And Mia," he continued, his words rhythmic and comforting, "when a mother gives everything she has to protect her child, God calls her home, not out of punishment, but because she completed her miracle. He let that settle gently. Your mother didn't die because you lived. She lived beautifully, and then she saved you. That was her final act of love. Mia pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to hold in a sob. Odin sensed the breaking point. The large German shepherd rose soundlessly and nudged his way between Rowan and Mia. He lifted his head and pushed his muzzle into Mia's trembling hands, letting her grip him as tightly as she needed. His warm weight grounded her, as though saying without words, "You're not alone anymore." A single tear slid down her cheek. "But my dad, he can barely look at me. He won't say it, but I know. I remind him of her." Rowan nodded slowly. He didn't deny it. "Sometimes," he said gently, "people hurt so deeply that everything reminds them of who they lost. Even the thing they love most." He brushed a strand of hair behind Mia's ear. "Your father doesn't turn away because you're guilty. He turns away because he is hurting, and he hasn't learned how to carry that pain." At that moment, a sharp rumble of thunder struck close enough to shake the window. The lamp flickered once, briefly dimming. Mia gasped, clutching Odin. Rowan nearly stood, but before he could move, the lamp steadied. Yet something unusual occurred. The small cross hanging above Rowan's bookshelf swayed gently, but the air was still. The window was shut. The house perfectly quiet. Odin's head snapped upward. His ears perked. He stared directly at the cross. Mia stared too. The swaying continued for a few seconds, slow, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat, before settling into stillness again. Rowan didn't speak. For a moment, none of them did. Then Mia whispered, voice trembling, Maybe she's still watching." Rowan's throat tightened. "I think she is," he said softly. "And I think she's glad you're safe tonight." The rain softened again. The moment passed, but its warmth remained. Mia leaned into Odin, and the dog curled protectively around her. Rowan placed a steady hand atop her small shoulder. And in the quiet, he saw it clearly. Not just fear, not just grief, but the long scar of guilt carved into a child who never deserved it. Tonight, for the first time, Mia had spoken the truth about her mother, and Rowan Hale understood. This child wasn't just scared. She was drowning in a burden meant for grown men, not little girls. She carried an invisible wound across her heart. If this touched your spirit, may God's grace shine upon you. Please like, comment, and subscribe to help spread the gentle miracles He brings. The rain had eased into a quiet drizzle by the time Rowan pulled his truck into the narrow driveway of Mia's home. The neighborhood was dim, the streetlights flickering with the tired glow of an old town that had seen too many hard years. The house itself was small and slightly run down, peeling paint along the edges, an untrimmed yard littered with last autumn's leaves. It wasn't a place of cruelty, Rowan sensed, but it was unmistakably a place of sorrow. Mia sat beside him in the passenger seat, wrapped in Rowan's old brown jacket, the sleeves swallowing her thin arms entirely. Her honey-brown hair fell over her shoulders in gentle waves, still warm from the night she had spent in Rowan's home. Odin sat in the back seat, his steady presence offering quiet reassurance. The German shepherd's ears stood alert, his gaze fixed on Mia as though refusing to let danger near her again. Rowan shut off the engine. The silence settled heavily. Mia's small hands twisted the jacket hem, and she stared through the windshield as though the house itself might swallow her whole. Rowan leaned slightly toward her. "I'm right here," he said softly. She nodded, but didn't move yet. It took her nearly 20 seconds to gather enough courage to unbuckle her seatbelt. When they stepped out, the damp air hugged them in a cold mist. The porch light flickered weakly. Rowan placed a steady hand on Mia's shoulder as they walked toward the door. Before he could knock, the door creaked open from within. Ethan Turner stood in the entryway. He was a man in his mid-30s, but grief had aged him closer to 50. His once strong frame had thinned, his cheeks were hollow, his jaw dark with unshaven stubble. His brown hair, once neatly kept, fell in uneven tufts over a weary forehead. His eyes, red, swollen, deeply recessed beneath heavy lids, held the unmistakable shadow of a man who carried too many ghosts. The worn gray t-shirt he wore hung loosely from his shoulders, and the faded jacket that clung to him was frayed at the collar. For a brief moment, Ethan simply stared. Then his gaze fell on Mia, small, pale, wrapped in another man's jacket, and something inside him collapsed. Not loud, not violent, just a subtle breaking, the kind that shatters inward rather than outward. Mia. His voice cracked, landing somewhere between relief and heartbreak. Mia flinched, not because she feared him, Rowan noticed, but because she had expected disappointment, not recognition. She took a small step back until Rowan's hand steadied her from behind. Ethan swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. "Where were you? I thought..." He trailed off, the sentence crumbling before it could form. He rubbed his forehead with a shaking hand, revealing fingernails bitten down to the skin. A small detail Rowan instantly took note of. Rowan stepped forward, keeping his tone measured. "She came to me," he said gently. "She was scared. I brought her home once she felt safe enough." Ethan nodded, though his eyes remained fixed on Mia. There was no anger there, only a hollow ache, a longing, a shame deeper than words. Mia's lip trembled. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered, barely audible. Ethan flinched as if the apology struck him physically. "No," he said hoarsely. "No, baby, you..." His breath stuttered. "You don't ever have to apologize for anything." He reached out a hand. Mia hesitated, not rejecting him, but unsure. Rowan didn't push. He simply stood close enough to provide a subtle shield. Ethan's hand dropped helplessly to his side. "You look like her," he murmured. "Every day you look more like her." His voice cracked again, a raw, splintered confession. "Sometimes it hurts to breathe when I see you." Mia blinked rapidly, eyes glistening. Rowan gently stepped forward. "Mr. Turner," he said softly, "she thinks she's the reason her mother is gone." Ethan's face drained of what little color remained. His fingers gripped the doorframe, knuckles whitening. "No," he whispered. "No. She can't think that." "She does," Rowan replied. "She carries it every second." Ethan's breath trembled. His eyes locked onto Mia's small, fragile form, her scraped knees, her timid stance, her trembling fingers clutching Rowan's jacket. And for the first time, Rowan saw something shift. Not anger, not despair, but a painful clarity. The kind that comes when a man realizes the wound he has protected himself behind is the same wound he has passed on to his child. Right then, Odin stepped forward. The German shepherd, normally composed and disciplined, walked directly to Ethan and sat in front of him, head held high, eyes soft, ears relaxed. He tilted his head slightly, studying Ethan with a focus that felt intentional, almost knowing. Ethan froze, startled. Odin's gaze held a depth Rowan had only seen a few times, when confronting someone grieving, someone carrying an invisible weight. The dog nudged Ethan's knee once, gently, like he was acknowledging the man's pain. Then Odin moved to Mia and pressed his side against her leg, forming a bridge between father and daughter. Ethan's breath hitched. His eyes glistened. Weakly, he murmured, "Even the dog knows." Rowan felt something stir, a quiet thread of divine timing weaving through the moment. Ethan stepped back into the house, motioning for them to follow. Inside, the space was dim but tidy, though its emptiness told its own story. A single photo frame sat on the table. Mia, as a toddler, sitting in her mother's lap. The woman was beautiful, smiling with a warmth that seemed to fill the room even now. Her long brown hair fell over her shoulders, her gentle eyes locked onto her daughter. Mia froze when she saw the picture. Ethan followed her gaze, his shoulders sagging. "I see her everywhere," he said quietly. "In the mirror, in the hallway, in you." His voice trembled. "And every time I look, it rips me open because I remember the last day I saw her alive." Mia stepped back, misreading his pain as rejection. Rowan crouched beside her. "It's not your fault," he whispered. Ethan sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "I lost my wife," he said, voice muffled. "And instead of holding on to the piece of her, she left me. I pushed that piece away." He inhaled sharply, brokenly. "I've been drowning, Mia, and I didn't see you were drowning too." Mia's tears fell silently. Ethan lifted his gaze, eyes swollen, pleading. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry." Mia stepped forward slowly, hesitantly. But when she reached him, she stopped just short, as though standing on the edge of a cliff. Ethan didn't force it. He simply opened his arms a little, leaving the choice to her. She didn't go into his arms, not yet. But she took one more step, just enough to place a small hand on his sleeve. Rowan watched the fragile moment, knowing healing wouldn't happen in a single night. Wounds carved by grief never close instantly. But for the first time, father and daughter stood facing each other, not as strangers in the same sorrow, but as two broken hearts trying to remember how to belong. The rain outside softened into a whisper. The room grew quiet, and Rowan Hale saw it clearly. Two people separated by only a few feet, yet living worlds apart. A father drowning in grief, a daughter drowning in guilt, both reaching slowly, painfully, toward the other. If this moment touched your spirit, may God's mercy surround you. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more stories guided by His healing grace. Morning came gently, as if even the sun was afraid of disturbing the fragile stillness that had settled in the Turner household. A pale light crept across the worn living room carpet, illuminating the scattered signs of a life paused by grief. A half-folded blanket on the couch, a forgotten coffee mug on the table. The single photograph of Mia and her mother standing tall like a silent guardian. Rowan stood by the window with his hands in his pockets, his tall frame straight, shoulders squared, yet softened by an expression of quiet reflection. The 45-year-old FBI agent carried the calm weight of a man who had seen war, but refused to let war define him. His salt and pepper hair, brushed back with little care for vanity, caught the sun with faint silver glints, and the fine lines on his face, etched there by years of service and loss, were softened now by compassion. Mia sat on the rug near Odin, tracing little circles in the dog's fur with gentle fingers. The German shepherd lay curled protectively around her, a silent sentinel. His brown eyes flicked up every now and then toward Rowan and Ethan, instinctively tracking the emotional shifts in the room. Mia's honey-brown curls fell over her pale cheeks, and when she looked up, Rowan caught something he hadn't seen in her before. An unsteady but unmistakable smile. It was small, timid, almost frightened of its own existence, but it was real. and it moved Rowan in ways he couldn't name. Ethan stood at the edge of the kitchen, his posture awkward, as though he wasn't sure he was allowed to step into the moment unfolding before him. The early light revealed the toll of the past years on him. His gaunt face, the shadowed hollows beneath his eyes, the stubble darkening his jaw like regret he had forgotten to shave away. His fingers, restless and uncertain, fumbled with the hem of his jacket. He wasn't a violent man or a cruel one, just broken. Like a vase cracked not by anger, but by a fall too sudden to survive. Rowan broke the silence first. "You slept at all?" he asked, his tone simple, not accusatory. Ethan shook his head. "Didn't try," he admitted. His voice was raw, low. "Didn't want to miss." He struggled to finish. "Didn't want to miss the chance to talk, really talk." Rowan nodded and motioned for him to step closer. They sat at the small dining table while Mia remained with Odin, her quiet giggles at the dog's playful paw taps drifting softly through the air. It was the first time laughter had lived in this house in years. Ethan stared at his hands, rubbing a thumb over a scar near his knuckle, a small, uneven line. "I keep thinking," he murmured, "that she'd still be alive if I'd grabbed her, pulled her back, shouted louder." His voice shook. But I froze. I froze watching the two people I love most in the world in the road. Rowan listened without judgment. "Trauma does that," he said quietly. "I've lost teammates, standing a foot from me. Sometimes the body freezes while the heart breaks." Ethan's eyes lifted, meeting Rowan's. "You lost someone too?" Rowan hesitated, a rare, vulnerable pause before nodding. "A partner. Good man. Brave." I looked away for 1 second, and when I turned back, he was gone. His jaw clenched for a moment. Guilt is a hard thing. It tells you lies. It makes you think you had control you never really had. Ethan's throat bobbed. "That's exactly it. I thought, if I don't look at Mia, maybe I won't see how I failed her mother. Maybe if I hide from her face, I won't remind myself that she lived and her mom didn't." Rowan leaned back slightly, crossing his arms slow and steady. "You didn't hide because you stopped loving her," he said. "You hid because you loved your wife so deeply you couldn't bear the memory of losing her." Ethan's breath shook. "But in doing that, I hurt Mia." His voice cracked. "And she's such a good kid. God, she's so good. She cleans the house. She tries to stay quiet. She tries so hard. And I couldn't even look at her." Rowan's gaze softened. "Love doesn't heal alone," he murmured. "It needs help." Ethan wiped his face with the back of his sleeve, ashamed of the tears. Mia looked over from across the room, and when she saw her father crying, her smile faded. She didn't run to him, not out of fear, but uncertainty. She didn't know if she was allowed to comfort him. Rowan noticed, and so did Odin. The German shepherd lifted his head, ears perked. He rose and padded toward Ethan, stopping at his chair. Ethan blinked. "You too?" he whispered to the dog, emotional exhaustion softening into something vulnerable. Odin nudged his knee gently, then looked pointedly toward Mia. A message without words. "Go to her." At that moment, a faint breeze passed through the open window. Soft, tender, out of place for a still morning. It carried the scent of lavender. Not from the house, not from the yard. Lavender. The scent Mia said her mother always wore. Mia smelled it too. Her head turned slowly, eyes widening. "Mom's scent," she whispered. Rowan looked to the window. The curtains barely swayed. The air outside was still. Ethan's breath caught. "That was her perfume," he murmured, voice trembling like a man caught between disbelief and yearning. None of them moved. None of them spoke. But the lavender remained. a small, gentle echo of a woman gone, as if she had stepped through the veil just long enough to whisper, "Start again." Odin sat down and looked up toward the ceiling, his gaze following something invisible to human eyes, something comforting. Rowan felt the hair on his arms rise, not from fear, but reverence. When the moment passed, Mia crawled a little closer to her father, still cautious, still unsure. Ethan didn't reach out. He didn't force it. But he lowered his hand, letting it hang by his side, an invitation. She sat inches from him, hugging her knees. Ethan swallowed hard. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted in a broken whisper. "I don't know how to fix what I've done." Mia's voice was small and trembling. "You don't have to fix everything. Just don't disappear." Rowan's breath caught at the simplicity of her plea. Ethan bowed his head. It wasn't forgiveness she offered. Not fully. But it was a beginning. And beginnings are precious things. The house, once heavy with silence, now held something different. Something fragile but unmistakably alive. A faint heartbeat of hope, thudding carefully through its walls. Rowan rose and walked toward the window, giving the two space. He touched the edge of the frame, staring out at the brightening yard. "You can start small," he said quietly. "Breakfast together, a walk, talking about her day, one step at a time." Ethan watched his daughter. "I can try," he whispered. Odin returned to Mia's side, pressing his head against her shoulder. She giggled, an unsteady, trembling sound, but one filled with life. Rowan turned, catching her expression, and felt warmth unfurl inside him. Seeing her smile, even briefly, felt like witnessing a sunrise after years of winter. Ethan watched her too, eyes softening with something like awe. The realization hit him slowly, painfully, beautifully. He still had a daughter, and she was still here, still reaching. He drew a shaky breath and looked at Rowan with an expression that held both humility and desperation. "Rowan, I need help." Ethan's voice cracked. "I don't know how to be who she needs." Rowan stepped closer, steady and grounded. "You don't have to know," he said gently. "You just have to be willing." Ethan swallowed, tears rising again, not from grief now, but from a flicker of courage. He inhaled deeply, placed a hand on the table to steady himself, and lifted his gaze to Rowan with a quiet, trembling resolve. "Can you help me learn how to be a father again? If this touched your heart, may God's grace shine upon your family. Please like, comment, and subscribe to spread His healing miracles." The days that followed unfolded with a quiet kind of grace, the kind that arrives not with fanfare, but with small, deliberate acts, the kind that gently rebuilds what life once shattered. Ethan Turner woke before dawn each morning, rubbing sleep and exhaustion from his eyes. But this time, he did not reach for a bottle. Instead, he stepped into the soft, golden light of early morning, letting the silence hold him accountable. He shaved for the first time in months, the rough bristles falling like remnants of an old life. He cleaned the kitchen, dusted the bookshelves, washed the windows streaked with neglect, and carefully straightened every picture on the wall. But he lingered the longest at the framed photograph of his wife. Her kind brown eyes smiled back at him, even through the glass, and Ethan gently wiped every edge, every corner, until her face shone bright again. One afternoon, Mia stepped through the doorway after school, still hesitant, still unsure, and froze. The house looked different. The rugs had been shaken clean, the curtains washed and hung straight. The living room smelled faintly of lemon and pine instead of stale sorrow. And at the center of the room stood Ethan, his gray jacket replaced by a clean shirt, his hair combed, his jaw freshly shaved. He looked years younger, not because time had turned back, but because he had decided to stop running from it. He knelt slowly, as though learning how to move in this new life. Mia stood motionless, her honey-brown curls framing her pale face, those wide eyes blinking in disbelief. "Dad," she whispered. Ethan placed a trembling hand on her head, fingers brushing her soft curls. It was the first time he had touched her gently in years. "Hi, sweetheart," he murmured, voice thick. "I've missed this." Mia's lips parted in astonishment. For a heartbeat, she looked almost frightened, perhaps afraid it was a dream she might wake from. Then her small shoulders relaxed, her breath shuddering. She didn't step into his arms yet, but she didn't pull away. Rowan stood in the doorway, watching with quiet satisfaction. Odin sat beside him, tail sweeping low across the floor. The German shepherd's eyes shone with approval, as though he understood exactly how far each of them had come. Hero Day arrived with the gentle warmth of spring. The schoolyard buzzed with excitement as students posed with parents, firefighters, EMTs, soldiers, community leaders, anyone they admired. Colorful banners hung from the fence, fluttering in the sunlight. Laughter drifted through the air like drifting petals. Mia stepped out of Rowan's truck, her yellow pastel dress fluttering around her knees, her white cardigan blowing softly in the breeze. Odin hopped down beside her, the black canine harness snug around his chest, his posture tall and proud. The dog walked at her side like a guardian knight sworn to protect her tiny kingdom. But the most striking sight was the two men walking with her. Rowan Hale in his Navy FBI jacket, tall and steady with the air of unshaken devotion, and Ethan Turner, dressed in a neatly pressed shirt and dark jeans, his face still lined with grief, but also with determination and gentleness, long buried but finally returning. The whispers began as soon as they reached the courtyard. Teachers paused mid-conversation. Parents exchanged glances filled with awe. Students gawked, their chatter fading into stunned silence. Brandon, the boy who had tormented Mia for years, stopped abruptly when he saw Odin's gaze sweep over him with slow, unmistakable recognition. The bully's smirk dissolved. He shifted awkwardly, looking down at his shoes. Rowan placed a comforting hand on Mia's shoulder. "Ready?" he asked quietly. Mia looked up at both men, her father and the man who had stood in the gap when her father could not, and nodded with a newfound steadiness. "Yes." Inside the classroom, children lined up beside their guests. Mia hesitated before stepping forward, but Ethan nudged her gently. "Go on, sweetheart. I'm right here." Her cheeks flushed as she reached the front. Rowan stood behind her, tall and steady. Odin sat beside her, tail lying softly in a calm arc. And then Ethan stepped forward. The room fell silent. Ethan Turner, once a ghost in his own home, now stood before a class of children, parents, and teachers. He looked down for a moment, gathering courage, then lifted his gaze. His voice, though tremulous, carried the weight of truth. "My wife," he began, "was the kindest person I ever knew. She had soft brown hair and a smile that felt like morning sunlight. She was a nurse, a healer, and she loved our daughter more than anything on this earth." His eyes found Mia, and they softened. "We lost her, saving Mia's life." A hush fell deeper, the children listening with wide eyes. "For a long time," Ethan continued, "I didn't know how to live with that kind of loss. I didn't know how to be a father and a grieving husband at the same time. So I did something terrible." His voice cracked. I let my grief turn into distance. I let my daughter grow up believing she was alone. Rowan watched quietly. Odin sat with regal stillness, as if sensing the holiness of the moment. "But I'm learning," Ethan said, slowly, clumsily, "and I'll keep learning." He looked at Mia again, voice breaking. "Because she's my daughter. She deserves joy. She deserves to smile. And I'm honored to stand beside her today." Mia's eyes shined like polished amber. Her lips curved into a bright, trembling smile, the kind that seemed to lift light itself into the air. The class erupted into applause, teachers wiping their eyes discreetly. And then, unexpectedly, Brandon stepped forward. The 9-year-old boy with messy hair and a nervous scowl glanced at Mia, fidgeting. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "For everything. I didn't know. I shouldn't have said those things." Mia blinked, then nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. The teacher beamed. Parents clapped. Rowan felt a swell of something warm rise in his chest, a gentle conviction that some moments were guided by more than circumstance. As the applause softened, a sudden beam of sunlight broke through the classroom window, a warm, golden ray that fell directly on Mia. Her hair glowed in its touch, turning her curls into a halo of soft gold. The light didn't linger on anyone else, just her. Rowan felt the breath leave him. Ethan's eyes widened. Mia tilted her head, smiling shyly as though she sensed a familiar presence. The beam lasted only a heartbeat, then faded. But in that heartbeat, everyone felt it. A blessing, a whisper of grace, a mother's love reaching across the distance between heaven and earth. When Hero Day ended, the 4 of them walked out into the afternoon light. Rowan in his navy jacket, Ethan with his steady steps, Mia holding both their hands, and Odin trotting proudly between them, tails swishing like a metronome of joy. They were not a perfect family, but they were a real one, forged not by blood alone, but by loss, forgiveness, and grace. And as the sun lowered, stretching warm amber light over their silhouettes, they walked together into a new beginning. 4 souls bound by healing, hope, and a love returned to them by God's quiet mercy. If this ending shined a little hope into your heart, may God bless your home. Please like, comment, and subscribe so His miracles can reach even more souls. In every broken home, every silent prayer, and every weary heart, God plants a small miracle waiting to be found. Sometimes it comes as a second chance, sometimes as forgiveness, and sometimes as the unexpected hands that lift us when we cannot stand alone. If this story reminded you that healing is real, that love can return, and that God still moves quietly through the moments of our ordinary days, then share this message with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment, subscribe to this channel, and may God bless and protect everyone who watches, granting peace to your home and light to your steps.